And this matter of discovery in hand, and chiefly of these most northerly countries and isles, hath cost me, since the last year, to send into divers places beyond the sea, and to men there in our age rightfully esteemed, to wit thee, honest philosopher and mathematician, Gerardus Mercator, and to that learned geographer, Abrahamus Ortelius, whose company also, since my first letter sent over, I have had of late in my poorhouse at Mortlake, and of the other in my youth, sufficient record is published of our great familiarity. And the chief pith of this chapter will testify the honest and philosophical regards that he had of my earnest request to him, inasmuch as speedily he returned the very principal authority whereupon he fashioned unto us that strange plat of the septentrional islands, that thereby our men, adventurers and discoverers, might understand what account is to be made, credit is to be given to the same description. This then other matter I received from him lately, April 20, 1577. To the most famous Dr. John D., his master and much esteemed patron, at Mortlake on the Thames, near London, with 3 enclosures. The 3 enclosures are some map resources. This is one of them. It's too dark to really see well, but I will include some other ones in this video later on that are much more clear. Folio 266. Fearing it would not reach you quickly enough if transmission were delayed, I have written down everything you have about the northern regions, and to these, etc. So Jacobus Schnoinen of Herzogenbusch traveled the world like Mandeville, but described what he saw with better judgment. He wrote in the Belgic language. The ideas about the northern regions which some time ago I extracted from him follow word for word, save for what, the sake of brevity or speed, I have translated into Latin, and if not always his words, I have retained the meaning. Note that it is by experience found that near the North Pole in the very dead of winter time is a continual glimmering twilight, at the least, the farther help of light, the moon's recourse above their horizon being not mentioned. In northern Norway, which is called dusky Norway, there are 3 months of darkness during which there is no sunlight but perpetual twilight. I think we all know about this, about the Arctic sun. This North Norway lies over against the country called the Province of Darkness, or Obscure Province, in Latin, Provincia Tenebrosa. Concerning it, however, there is nothing written in Marco Polo, and the Province of Darkness is the most western bound of the Grand Cham's land. And between this province and dusky Norway there is only 12 miles of sea. From North Norway you cannot reach the indrawing sea, which lies beyond Greenland, for it lies still further northward. This North Norway stretches as far as the mountain ranges which encompass the North Pole, and borders on this mountain range for about 17 miles by land. The rest is all sea, and this is the same mountain range which, in folio 266b, comes close, within about 15 French miles, and then stands further off towards the east. And near here, toward the north, those little people of whom there is also mention in the Gestae or Thurii, and their borders on it, besides a beautiful open land. And this land lies between the Province of Darkness and the Province of Burgi. But between each of these provinces and these lands lies an indrawing sea. And this province, the open land, has a mountain border of over 72 French miles by land. These facts and more about the geography of the north are to be found in the beginning of the Gestae Arturii. The islands adjacent to the North Pole were formerly called Scilii, or perhaps Thule, and now the Septentrionals. Among them is North Norway. And there are many small rivers, some 2, some 1, some 3 keenings wide, more or less, and they're called indrawing seas because the current always flows northward so strongly that no wind can make a ship sail back against it. So keenings are an old measure. Here a keening was 17 to 20 miles. So back to the indrawing seas. No wind can make a ship sail back against these indrawing seas, and in these latitudes the mountains reach up to the clouds and are almost all rock bare of vegetation, and it is almost always misty and dull weather, and it is well known that beyond 70 or 78 degrees of latitude there is no human habitation. Moreover, this 78th parallel goes in a circle round the Arctic Pole in the form of a high mountain range. So, already so far what we have is landmass at the northern pole that's not like what we've had described. It has an indrawing sea and a huge mountain range which wraps around the entire 78th parallel in a circle around the Arctic Pole. So continuing on now, part of the army of King Arthur, which conquered the northern islands and made them subject to him, and we read that nearly 4,000 persons entered the indrawing seas who never returned. But in AD 1364, 8 of these people came to the king's court in Norway. Among them were 2 priests, one of whom had an astrolabe, who was descended in the 5th generation from a Bruxellensis. One, I say, the 8 were sprung from those who had penetrated the northern regions in the first ships. That great army of Arthur's had lain all the winter of 530 AD in the northern islands of Scotland, and on May 3 a part of it crossed over into Iceland. Then 4 ships of the aforesaid land had come out of the north, and warned Arthur of the indrawing seas, so that Arthur did not proceed further, but peopled all the islands between Scotland and Iceland, and also peopled Groenland, which is their name for Greenland. So it seems the indrawing sea only begins beyond Groenland. In this Groenland he found people 23 feet tall, that is to say, of the feet with which land is measured. So they correct this as well later on. This is, I think, just a combination of the wrong verbiage here. When those 4 ships returned, there were sailors who asserted that they knew where the magnetic lands were. So where it says here, in this Groenland he found people 23 feet tall, that will be corrected later. It's 4 feet tall, 23 people. Arthur afterwards put on board a fleet of 12 ships, about 1,800 men and about 400 women. They sailed northwards on May 3 in the year following that in which the former ships had departed. And of these 12 ships, 5 were driven on the rock in a storm, but the rest of them made their way between the high rocks on June 18, which was 44 days after they had set out. More precisely, some of them made their way. The priest who had the astrolabe related to the King of Norway that in AD 1360 there had come to these northern islands an English Minorite from Oxford, who was a good astronomer, etc. Leaving the rest of the party who had come to the islands, he journeyed further through the whole of the north, etc., and put into writing all the wonders of those islands, and gave the King of England this book, which he called in Latin Inventio Fortunatae, which book began at the last climate, that is to say latitude 54 degrees, continuing to the pole. This monk said that the mountain range goes round the north like a wall, save that in 19 places the indrawing channels flow through it, whereof the widest is not above 12 French miles across, the narrowest 3/4 miles, and through the narrowest no ship would be able to go. So what we have here is the monk said that the mountain range that wraps around the North Pole goes around it like a wall, but in 19 places indrawing rivers or channels flow through it. The widest of these is not more than 12 French miles across. No ship would be able to go back against this current because of the rush of the water. The mountain range is surrounded by sea except in northern Norway, where the Norwegian mountain range reaches it for a width of about 17 miles, and right under the North Star, opposite Norway, there lies a fair level land which is uninhabited, where many beautiful, and then we lose it here, lacuna. In the east there stretches out an arm of land which is nearly all wooded, and narrows continually. The farther north? ? The more so that it is not more than 1 mile wide where it meets the mountain range. Otherwise no land touches the circumference of mountains anywhere, but in many places the sea is so narrow that one can see the far side. And the mountain range covers a breadth of 8 miles, and in the whole circle, said the Minorite, there is no habitation except on the east side, where in that narrow land already mentioned there were 23 people not above 4 feet tall, whereof 16 were women. This monk said that in 2 other places further inland he found a great piece of ship's planking and other balks which had been used in big ships, besides many trunks of trees which at some earlier date had been hewn down, so that he could say with certainty that there had formerly been habitation there, but the people had now gone, and that the country where they, the pygmies I believe he means, lived was more than 6 degrees broad, that is to say 20 days' journey, and no one could cover the distance on foot, and it was 10 degrees long, that is 33 days' journey. Also there lay there, said he, an indrawing sea of 5 channels, gathered together, which came through the mountain range out of the 19 channels mentioned. And in this indrawing sea, 12 French miles wide, and measures across about 4 days' journey. We have a footnote in Ms. in another hand. Hugo de Hibernia, the Minorite, so that's the name of the gentleman. Note that diverse places like these northern isles are almost within the keening of the mainlands opposite to them, but in no place does it touch. This inhabited place of 10 degrees long, 0.6 degrees broad, may have another more artificial exposition than so by days' journals to understand the degrees of longitude. That place about 0.8 degrees of latitude, and so to the reckon 0.3 days journey, and 3/4 upon 1. A day's journey is evidently reckoned as 18 French miles, in terms of average land travel. So I'll continue on with their description of the northern pole here, the indrawing seas, the whirlpool, and the magnetic Mount Meru. And at the west of the aforesaid country is another indrawing sea, into which 3 more channels go out of the aforesaid 19. And that channel which they, the ship, had entered also flowed therein. And all these channels which turn tortuously when they come out of the mountains drive ships immediately ashore. But whatever channels flowed straight into the innermost seas, into which the 19 channels gather, and these ships must of necessity be carried current-wise, i.e. inwards, and become lost. Also said this Minorite, these innermost seas number 4, and the one which lies on the west side was quite 34 French miles abroad. And on the other side of this sea was the best and healthiest land in all the north. Also he said that the sea which lay on the east side could never be frozen, because so many channels united there, and it was narrow besides, so that the current was very strong. But that the one which ran to the west on the west side used to freeze almost every year, and remained frozen sometimes for 3 months. And in that land he had seen no signs of habitation. But in the country which lay to the north, opposite it, he had recognized planks of ships and sea trunks. All of these 4 countries are high open lands, i.e. plateaus, except some mountains 4 fathom high. There are many trees of Brazil wood. When this priest with the astrolabe, and it trails off there. So there is much Brazil trees growing here. I'll continue on. In the midst of the 4 countries is a whirlpool, into which there empty these 4 indrawing seas which divide the north. And the water rushes round and descends into the earth just as if one were pouring it through a filter funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on every side of the pole, that is to say 8 degrees altogether, except that right under the pole there lies a bare rock in the midst of the sea. So this would be Mount Meru. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it is all of magnetic stone, and is as high as the clouds. So the priest said, who had received the astrolabe from this Minorite in exchange for a testament. And the Minorite himself had heard that one can see all round it from the sea, and it is black and glistening, and nothing grows thereon, for there is not so much as a handful of soil on it. That was the writing and words of the Minorite, who has since journeyed to and fro 5 times for the King of England on business. They are to be found in a book called Inventio Fortunae, of which the Minorite himself was author. The aforesaid priest said also to the King of Norway that in the country where he dwelt not 6 times a year did it rain, and even that was drizzle, lasting not more than 6 or 7 hours. So some other descriptions are much Brazil trees growing here on this most beautiful land of the north, a whirlpool in the midst of the North Pole, about or under the North Pole, the whirlpool being 480 miles over or wide, excepting the diameter of the great rock in the middle. A wonderful, great, and high rock right under the North Star. I'll show you where I'm reading here. And in the midst of the aforesaid whirlpool. So I'm just going to repeat that so it really sinks in. At the center of our Earth, at the North Pole, what we call the North Pole, the only place that a magnet is pulled towards, being the northern pole itself. There is no southern pull, and therefore no southern pole, as it is Antarctica wrapped around us, an ice sheet wrapped around us. So there is only a pull towards this northern magnetic rock pole. The whirlpool around the magnetic rock and around the North Pole is about 480 miles wide. So as we've said, a wonderful great high rock rises in the midst. Continuing on with the letter here, wrapping it up, the wind never blows hard enough to drive a corn mill. Furthermore, the air is always cool. And the other 7 that were with him testified that they had also heard such things as he related, said by their elders, but they had never seen them. This is word for word everything that I have copied out of this author, Chnoinen, years ago. Farewell, most learned man, with my most affectionate esteem. 1577, Gerard Mercator, end of translation. So, that's the end of the letter from Mercator to John Dee. So there is further documentation of this letter and of the information contained therein. I'll continue on with this now to show you, to lend credence to the flat earth model and to lend credence further to this story as well, to show that it's not just from one letter or from one source. So Dee's first inquiry on the subject of the North had been directed to Ortelius by a letter written in January 1577, which is printed as number 67 in Hessel's Ortelis Epistulae, 1887. In this letter, the writer recalls that his friend had indicated the general expectation of Arctic discoveries from the British people, a matter which he himself had pressed long ago, 1553 to 1556. He was now urging, indeed insisting, that further attempts should be made, and he goes on to mention his researches into what the ancients had said and done in respect to this voyage, as well as his recent preparation of a new nautical manual for the sailors. But his particular inquiry at the moment was for the authority that Ortelius had used for inserting the names of Cape Paramantia, Los Jardinos, and some others on the north coast of North America, names which appeared on no other map. He begged for an immediate answer, for our people are already maturing their plans for the northern seaboard. Last year they merely paid their respects to the Greenland Strait, but they concluded with good reason that the whole shore could be circumnavigated and they could reach the Eastern Ocean that way. There is no record of how Ortelius answered Dee's letter, but he came to England in the spring when he saw William Camden and Richard Hakluyt in London, and came down to Dee at Mortlake on March 12th. 5 or 6 weeks later, Frobisher sailed on his second voyage. In fact, Frobisher was secretly commissioned to look for gold ore and not to search for the Northwest Passage. Meanwhile, Dee had been questioning Mercator as to the provenance of the circular inset of the polar regions, which appeared on his Great Wall map of 1569, together with some accompanying legends. The reply he received was dated April 20th, 1577, which is transcribed above. Disappointingly, it provides no fresh clue to the identities of Jacob Schnoinen or the author of Inventio Fortunatae. Yet it raises the question, must not the latter have visited Greenland or even Markland, Labrador, in view of the knowledge he displays? And again, what was the version of the Gestae Arthurii which all parties referred to familiarly, and which contained such strange new detail of that king's enterprises? So is this what has been covered up and hidden from us? Is this why there's a dew line at the North Pole, the Defense Early Warning Line? Is this why not only is there an Antarctic Treaty, but the Arctic Treaty and the recent talk about who is going to control the Arctic? I think in light of our new discoveries or our newfound knowledge of the way that our flat Earth plane functions, that it's definitely not out of the question that if this is at the center of our plane, that this would be something that they might want to hide. Particularly, what would people think if there was a 480-mile wide or 500-mile wide gigantic sucking sound, or gigantic whirlpool sucking all of the world's oceans into a whirlpool at the center of our Earth? I mean, it would be just as scary as people thinking that they would go off the edge of the Earth. And at first glance it might seem a ridiculous idea, but when you combine it with the other functions of the way that our flat Earth plane functions, the other phenomena that are found there, like the sun spinning around the magnetic pole, it kind of adds more credence to it and kind of makes it make more sense. So this is the map that Mercator made showing this area. So you can see here the Borgi Regio, which is, I believe, Canada, or the northern portions of North America and Canada. This part, you can see the mountain range here that wraps around. I'm sure you've all seen maps like this and ones in color since you've come to the flat Earth. So we have right here the Ocythicus. I don't know if you can see the blue box there. Borgio Regio, kind of North American area. And I guess you can make out the rest of it. You can see the 4 channels that are flowing in here, and Mount Meru, of course, or what can be called Mount Meru, the magnetic lodestone in the center, the gigantic mountain of magnets in the center. Also here you have a little further detail on it and some interesting insertions, such as one word that I find interesting. We still call them the aurora borealis, also the hyperborean or hyperboreal, and you can see it here, the Hyperborea Europe, insular desert, and anon phase. I'm not sure what that says actually. Over here, on this portion, you can see that what they've done is this is the full 360, and it's just been opened up, splayed out to add this other information. So what you have here under this blue area is Arcticus, Scythia intra Imaumontum, and you can see on the bottom there Hyperboreae and Moscovia. So there's Russia, Eastern and Western Europe, and all encompassed in this area here. Russia, Moscovia right here. Let's see if you can see this right here. Moscovia is right in that box there. Okay. Here would be England and Western Europe. And then over here we have Canada, and the eastern coast of North America. I'm going to continue on now with some further writers who've spoken about this to add credence to this story, that there may actually be a giant hole at the center of our Earth sucking in the oceans. The 8 strangers told King Magnus, and the fact about the Minarite's journeys to and fro after he had written his book, that the book Inventio Fortunatae really existed does not depend on the evidence of Jacobus Struinen, and because Johann Reusch quoted from it and used it. John Dee made a marginal correction of its title, and it is also casually mentioned by Bartolomé de las Casas in his Historia de las Indias in 1570. When, speaking of floating and burning islands in the Western Ocean, he says that there is mention of the same in the book called Inventio Fortunatae, which shows that he probably read that as well. A comparison of Mercator's Arctic map with that of Reusch in the Rome Ptolemy 1508, and with the same region on Beheim's globe of 1492, together with a study of all the map legends side by side with Mercator's letter, makes it possible to reconstruct at the least the basic topographical information contained therein of the Friar's book. Briefly, according to the writer of Inventio Fortunatae, the world's continent was bordered at some distance polewards by an indrawing or insucking sea, which by means of 19 channels broke through a lofty circumpolar mountain range in latitude 78 and 79 degrees. These channels occurred in groups of 3, 4, 5, and 7 respectively, and the 4 groups gathered or flowed into 4 indrawing seas, which all poured into a single central sea about the pole. Here there was a lofty shining black rock of magnetic stone, 33 miles or leagues in circumference, that is to say about 10 miles across, and here the ocean waters swirled round in a whirlpool and were sucked down into the bowels of the earth. The 4 indrawing seas separated 4 land areas, of which 2, as Mercator and Reusch agree, were inhabited, and 2 not. Mercator puts pygmies or scralings in one of them. Reusch puts a people called Arumphii, or Arumphali, who appear also in one of his imaginary Atlantic islands, Fel Arumphili alas Chibes. Beheim, although he shows 19 or perhaps only 18 channels leading from the main ocean and gives some vague indication of the high mountains, does not completely separate 2 of the 4 land masses, while the pole is masked by the metal axis of his globe. The general resemblance of his outlines is apparent. So the legends on Reusch's map run as follows. We read in the book the Inventio Fortunatae that beneath the Arctic pole there is a high rock of magnetic stone 33 German miles in circumference. The indrawing seas around this rock flowing in as if in a vessel that lets water down a hole, i.e. a funnel. There are 4 surrounding islands of which 2 are inhabited, but they are bordered by huge mountains 24 days' journey across which forbid human habitation. Here the indrawing sea begins, Here the ship's compass does not hold, nor can ships containing iron turn back. In note 1, the high rock is said to measure 33 German miles, units which are 4 times the French miles of the Mercator letter, while the latter on his map writes 33 leagues. This is typical of the current confusion as to measures of length at the time. Mercator, besides, merely calls the rock lofty and black without reference to its magnetic quality, for he had his own theory about the location of the magnetic pole. Ruysch's reference to the upsetting of the magnetic compass may have arisen from his own actual experience of its great variation in the Labrador region, and he also appears to have put his own interpretation on this, and onto the fact that the ships could not turn back once in the indrawing seas. So we'll continue here. Touching the description of the north parts, I have taken the same out of the voyage of James Schnoinen of Hearts of Busk, which alleged certain conquests of Arthur, king of Britsine, and the most part, the chiefest things among the rest, he learned of a certain priest in the king of Norway's court in the year 1364. This priest was descended in the 5th generation from them which King Arthur had sent to inhabit these islands, and he reported in the year 1360 a certain English friar, a Franciscan, and a mathematician of Oxford came into these islands, who, leaving them and passing further by his magical art, described all those places that he saw, and took the height of them with his astrolabe, according to the form that I have set down in my map, and as I have taken it out of the aforesaid Jacob Schnoinen. He said that those 4 indrafts were drawn into an inward gulf or whirly pool, with so great a force that the ships which once entered therein could by no means be driven back again, and that there is never in these parts so much wind blowing as might be sufficient to drive a corn mill. Geraldus Cambronales hath certain words altogether alike with these. Hakluyt follows his translation with a further testimony taken from a summary which Dee had drawn up from Mercator's letter for the information of the Queen. Anno 1360, that is to wit, in the 34 years of the reign of the triumphant King Edward III, a friar of Oxford, being a good astronomer, went in company with others to the most northern islands of the world, and there leaving his company together, he travelled alone and purposely described all the northern islands, with the indrawing seas and the record thereof. At his return he delivered to the King of England, the name of which book is Inventio Fortunatae, Alter Fortunae, qui liber incipe agradu 54 usque ad polum, which friar for sundry purposes after that did 5 times pass from England thither and home again. Mercator has 4 further inscriptions placed on the map itself, which are of assistance in distinguishing the great polar islands described in the letter. They read as follows. This channel has 5 mouths, entries, and because of its narrow, swift current, it never freezes. Here live pygmies at most 4 feet tall, who are like those in Greenland called skraelings. This channel is entered by 3 mouths and remains frozen for 3 months every year. It's 37 leagues long. This island is the best and healthiest of the whole north. The ocean rushes in between these islands by 19 mouths and makes 4 channels by which it is incessantly carried northwards, and there it disappears into the bowels of the earth. I'll leave the authenticity of this letter to you to be the judge of that. And what I'll do now is just show you a few more versions of that map, or versions of information that's shown in that map. So we'll start right here. And what we have here is Orbis Terrae Compendiosa Descriptio, which is another Mercator map, or at least a lot of the information in it is from Mercator, I should say. It didn't turn out as well as I thought it would, but you can see the 2 islands here, and on the other side the other 2 islands, which is a link up. When you add when you look at the accuracy of this map as a whole, you know, in the known parts, you can see that they were not being silly making this map. And so when he put those parts on there, he was not being silly. It is what he believed was there, or knew was there. This is a better version of it. Aiming straight down, and you see the Great Northern Sea, Greenland, and Baffin's Bay. The pink side on the right side here is North America and the northern part of Canada, and the left side would be Russia and Europe and Asia. We'll carry on. A more recent version, you can see that all the datum is very accurate right up till you get up to the north, and then it's just simply cut off, as though we're not allowed to know what is there. This is a picture showing Erythea being raptured or taken by the Boreans. So you can see literature, which I don't necessarily or don't at all subscribe to, about the hermeneutic interpretation of mankind. But what I think is interesting here is that there's all these links throughout history of the Boreans and the Hyperboreans, and that the people there were very advanced people, that Atlantis and Hyperborea are connected and are the same place. I think this has become an obvious conclusion to a lot of flat earthers who have looked into this side of the research. Here is another old map that was done by Mercator, or assisted by Mercator. And again, you can see the northern polar region showing Groenlandia and other aspects that tie into the last maps that I just showed you. But these maps are nowhere near as good. Again, here, this is an inset from a very large map, and you can see that it's called the Septentrionalis, the Franciscan. And in the inset here, you can see the further detail of some of these islands and some of the makeup. And again, as soon as you get to that northern pole, that 78 degree, they cut off the information and you're not allowed to see what's up there. Same thing here. It's called the Borealis. So again, the Boreans, Hyperborea. And this is northern Canada. Okay. And as you can see, again, this is from a large world map, which is very accurate when you take the map as a whole. So I don't think that he was adding silliness or make-believe when he created these maps. So, in conclusion, I guess you've seen, I think you've seen what I wanted to show you. I'll add a link at the bottom of this video. And we'll continue on with our learning about the flat earth and the reality of the environment that we live in. I know that this is difficult information. I'm just going to go on a little further about how difficult this information is for people to take in. I've been talking about this stuff with a lot of people, and I see that our indoctrination, because of it beginning at and before our birth, because of us being so indoctrinated since birth, it takes people months, literally months, of conscious and subconscious reiteration of this information to come to the conclusion that they are at a flat earth. I love the quotes from the Zetetic Astronomy of Samuel Rowbottom, where he talks about that if people don't know that the earth is flat, it's merely from a lack of knowing about all of the information. Of course, everyone who knows and is a flat earther knows that it's very simple and very easy once they know. You know, water being level, is a showstopper. The sun, the Earth going around the sun, and the fact that if you trace it out on a piece of paper or trace it out in any way, you'd see that if it were a heliocentric model, the night and day would flip every 6 months. So we flat earthers know that it's flat, and we know how easy it is to know that it's flat. But we have to remember how hard it was for us to come over originally, and how much your mind needed to unbrainwash itself. So that's all I have for now. I'll be carrying on and having further videos about this stuff, I hope, if you guys like it. If not, too bad. I'll thank you for your comments below, and good day.